I want to start with discussion about a practice in Tibet, a yogic practice called charnel ground practice. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a charnel ground, but a charnel ground is essentially the Tibetan version of a graveyard or a burial ground. They're not the green, grassy area, little park-like areas we have here in the West, because Tibet's mostly rock, and it's kind of hard to dig graves. So the charnel ground is essentially an above-ground receptacle for bodies, which are dismembered by charnel ground attendants, and the parts of the bodies dispersed and then picked over by the jackals and the vultures. The yogic practice of charnel ground practice involves essentially a practitioner spending some time, specifically at night, perhaps a succession of nights, in the charnel ground. Now, as you can imagine, this is a very strange space to spend your time meditating. It's said that the yogic practitioner encounters spirits and entities, the sounds of wild animals, literally sits there watching the bones get picked and the matter and the material of bodies be dispersed and scattered and disappear. And, of course, relates that to his or her own internal experience, which is essentially a process of coming to terms with the spirits within each of us, the hidden ones and the ones we think of as ourselves, our own internal projections of who we are, our own quote-unquote personalities, or what we might refer to as our egos. And one comes out of this experience with a deeper realization of egolessness, of the selflessness that actually we all embody, but has been layered over with this rather elaborate fabrication that we call Larry, or whatever your name is. In the West, the closest approximation I have to a charnel ground practice is the practice of politics. You get to watch your bones get picked over. You get attacked by jackals and eaten alive. And in the end, you either defend yourself and this fabricated ego, and it survives or doesn't, or you let yourself experience the dissolution of your own ego for some other purpose, for some other greater purpose. Now, in the case of the yogis, of course, their greater purpose is the bodhisattva path of enlightenment. They have essentially devoted themselves to the enlightenment of others, and for that matter, the enlightened society that surrounds them. So the notion of the dissolution of ego is part of the practice. In American politics, this is a little more cloudy. And it's certainly become the realm of superegos. I mean, that's the other path we have towards a sense of something greater. If the sense of something greater becomes the greater me, that can be pursued. And I don't have to give you any examples of people in the political realm who've pursued the path of greater me. But there is another path. So a lot of the experience of the yoga of politics is what the motivation is. And if the motivation is about society, if it is about others, if it's about actually improving the lot and the fate of the world, then, of course, it absolutely requires completely giving up oneself, all sense of privacy, because after all, if you become a public figure, and I've been the mayor of my town, and I'm engaged in a political effort there right now just as an ordinary citizen, where we put an initiative on the ballot, and my name is in the newspaper all the time, and people are blogging about me, and I'm called a liar, and I'm called corrupt, and I have to come into contact with the charnel ground of my own projections and my own spirits and ghosts that inhabit the interior of my space. I think it was Tip O'Neill, the former Speaker of the House, who said all politics are local. Actually, all politics are internal. And one must encounter all of these projections of self and the people around oneself as part of the political process. So the temptation of ego in politics, of course, we can see results in the downfall of a lot of politicians. Much like the Buddha before his enlightenment sat and encountered the temptations of Mara, the seductions, the creatures, the fears. All of that, of course, confronts someone in political life. Falling for those temptations results in the likes of Eliot Spitzer or any of the other examples we've got, for that matter, Bill Clinton. As I say, that ego path is a path. I mean, it's not the path that leads to enlightenment, but there is some temporary satisfaction along with unbelievable suffering. If the motivation for becoming involved in politics is different, if it actually involves others and what you can contribute to a community, then of course it requires an absolute confidence in the basic goodness of others, of yourself, and society at large. Without that core trust, you're basically walking out into the world having removed not just your clothing and your armor, but you're actually skinless. Everything about you is exposed. And so you've got to come to grips in those terms with constantly being pierced and having to experience that and make sense of it in some way. Integrate it into your practice. Integrate it into the path of basic goodness so that you understand when you are attacked, there is actually no attacker, no one being attacked, and no such thing as attack. Now, this is another way of describing the commitment of the Bodhisattva path, and that's essentially what the heart of enlightened politics must be. You have to accept that you may come out of it burnt to a cinder. In fact, it's highly likely. And that's okay. That's okay, because you're providing a vehicle. You are a vehicle for a force in society that, once liberated, takes you where it's going to want to go. You can't impose your outcomes. So the other part of the yoga of politics is the completely giving up of outcomes. It's doing the work, telling the truth, showing up, and giving up on the outcome. This also happens to be what I believe is the Zuni prayer of practice, a Native American view. So that's what I'm doing now. I didn't get to where I am without fighting it and learning the best way to work with politics. And that happened when I became a serious practitioner in Shambhala. I was in elected office for 12 years. In the last 4 years, it became integrated with my practice. And that's when it changed. And that's when the potential of it was exposed to me, the beauty of it, the goodness of it. And I've never let that go. Now, I've been out of office for 7, 8 years. And as I said, I'm involved in this initiative process over trying to influence the direction of commercial development in our community, which in an age of materialism, you all know, is headed to the deep end. And we're trying to give the community a chance, give the community a voice. And this whole process of liberating oneself and liberating a community comes out in something like this. I think Alex mentioned how voiceless and powerless people feel, and they do. And when it comes to politics, that's like the limit. People couldn't feel less powerful than when they look at the way the world and those who make the decisions in the world operate and how remote one feels from that experience. When you get involved in an initiative process, and all of a sudden you've essentially subverted the existing status quo of the way decision-making gets made in the community, all of a sudden, everybody who votes in that town goes, "You mean I get to have a say on what a policy is going to be going forward? I mean, I can participate?" Everybody lights up. Everybody wakes up. Even the people who hate what you're doing. They all wake up too. So that's the magical moment, is that you get to participate in waking up a whole community on both sides and let the process take its course. Tell the truth, show up, do the work, let go of the outcome. It's quite a path. And for any of you interested in the yoga of politics, it's really no different than ordinary life. It just happens to be ordinary life on rocket fuel. That's what I have to say today. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. So I know that there are certain politicians who are openly, like yourself, it sounds like, openly embraceful of like mindfulness type of ideas. And hearing your phrase of enlightened politics, is there any sort of a movement that's going on that's sort of maybe endorsing certain people or having values that can be more openly sort of like expressed in the political system that might sort of have some sort of influence on where our country is headed that you're aware of?
There are some things. There's nothing that I know of that's particularly organized like this. However, that said, I've recently been in communication with President Rioch, who, working with the Sakyong and the mayor of Louisville, and this whole notion of compassionate cities, has become a bit of a movement and a bit of an effort. And there's a group of us who are either currently mayors or have been mayors or involved in staffs of governmental bodies who are now going to have a meeting, a conversation, converse as a group, to talk about how it is we can help facilitate this view, bring it out into the world more, beginning to get some mainstream discussion of it. It's interesting, you know, there's the folks who are involved representing the status quo of the system accuse those of us who've brought this idea forward as either the vocal minority or a small group or other sort of pejorative phrases to marginalize our meaning. But of course, every new idea starts with a small group. And it's the powerful ideas that have merit, and I mean merit in the big sense, end up just rippling out. This is the power of ideas. It doesn't require a special machine. It's just people talking to each other that moves the idea as a wave through society, and it transforms society. It can really transform society. So that's one thing that's happening.
Governor Brown is Buddhist, though.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Raised a Jesuit, did spend some time in a Zen monastery, spent a lifetime in politics, and is a very difficult guy to talk to, actually, having spent some time talking to Mr. Brown. It's hard to get his attention.
So Larry, I really loved your analogy of the charnel ground. And I was thinking that maybe having Congress go spend about a week in the charnel ground might really change their attitude about some things, you know?
You know, I'm currently rereading Marshall McLuhan's book, Understanding Media, written in 1964, preceding the internet, preceding, Facebook and all of this. And the point he makes is that the linear, regular, reproducible quality of the literate society essentially forms the container, we use this Shambhala word, the container into which the society models itself. And so what we're stuck with at the moment in America is a political form that intrinsically is slower and less informed than the population at large, which is electronically and cybernetically in knowledge of everything, not just about what's happening down the street, but what's happening in Syria. I mean, the Congress has become essentially a relic of a past age of reading something that may have made its way to your desk. And that's not the way the world is anymore. And so we're going to go through these very, very difficult periods as a culture, and McLuhan predicted all this, as the new media and the new technologies essentially disrupt everything. And the people who are, as any system, who are attached to the existing status quo system because they've benefited from it or they've become dependent on it, are going to be completely freaked out and frantic as they see that the mechanisms they've relied on for all these years no longer actually function for them anymore. McLuhan describes us as moving, and this is appropriate to Shambhala, is moving towards a more tribal consciousness, which was where, of course, human culture began, was in a tribal form, and then moved into this essentially corporate form of hierarchical values in which only certain people were empowered to know something. They were the experts, and they're the ones who had to make all the decisions. As the new technologies and communication technology has changed, it's basically provided all that information to everyone. So all of a sudden, each of us feel involved as far as we want to reach. You want to get involved in talking about Syria? You know as much about Syria as 99% of the people in the world. You know what the 1% used to know. And society has to catch up with these new forms. And it's going to be very wrenching, very difficult. Shambhala can play a role in it, or the mindfulness community can play a role in helping society not demonize the differences. That's the problem we've got right now, is the demonizing of differences. Our opposition in our little campaign in Sonoma is intent on demonizing us, our side. And we are intent on not demonizing them, which just feels great. You see, that's the all-victorious quality. If we don't win the election, we've still won. You see? Who could ask for more than that?
So as a former tribal leader and still tribal influence, how might the Shambhala community, if you will, best embrace other tribes? I mean, we're blocks away from that large and successful tribe called Glide, and I'm sure there are others around. How would you recommend move forward?
And that really is the thrust of Shambhala, a major thrust of Shambhala right now. And this whole notion of affinity circles, and I would urge you to go to the affinity circle website that was created, and you'll see that we launched that with, I think there's at least 60 different affinity circles that do not require membership in Shambhala to participate. In fact, the whole website is separate as a website because we don't want it to require any kind of specific membership in Shambhala for people to be able to connect. It's basically disciplinary. So the folks who have an interest in healthcare, whether it's a Catholic somebody in a Catholic hospital, or somebody in Shambhala, or someone involved in hospice care. I mean, whatever the discipline is, if it has to do with taking care of people in distress, they have an opportunity to talk to each other. They have their emails. They have meetings and group meetings set up, and we're trying to integrate this into online conferences as well. And this is basically our attempt to pull together from the community of people who are already doing good work and trying to build an enlightened society from their point of view, together to be able to share resources, share talent, share ideas. It is, to me, I heard the other day that this is, of course, one of the major interests of the Sakyanga, is how is this affinity circle process going? And it includes, ironically enough, what Alex was talking about, which is getting together and talking, coming up with some ideas, putting them out there, putting something into action. I mean, that's specifically what these circles are about.
Could you speak about expectations just a moment again, in not giving up on the expectation? From your example, the other team is demonizing you guys, and you guys are working not to demonize them, so therefore you're the good guys and they're the bad guys. Your initiative does not get met the way you would like it to be, but hey, you won anyway. I think of a lot of situations, from the Obamacare thing in the House of the Republicans, it delayed and all that kind of stuff, to segregation, the earlier days, and integration. If we don't stay with our value, yay, we won, we're the good guys, but we still have people of color drinking out of the water fountains, separate water fountains. So if you could address that just a little bit.
Well,
not giving up the expectation of an
well, when
outcome.
I say giving up expectation, I'm really talking about simply accepting the fact that this illusion of control is that we can't control the outcomes. The world is too complex, and the forces at play are too complex, and we can't see them, and there's no way of absolutely anticipating the future. So one falls back on the motivation behind what one does and being devoted to it, which is the showing up part, and being honest and telling the truth, which is holding to, at least from my standpoint, explicating a path of virtue as a reason for why you're doing what you're doing, and then doing the work. Now, the work doesn't end when the election happens. The work never ends. The Bodhisattva path, for all intents and purposes, in a classic Buddhist view, goes on forever until everyone has crossed the line. Every being, all of them, everywhere in the universe, in every world system. Interestingly enough, in the Mahayana, this world system, it's called the Saha world. S-A-H-A. There are supposedly, as explicated in the likes of the Avatamsaka Sutra, limitless, infinite world systems, each one inhabited by a Buddha and the attendant bodhisattvas. But this world system, the Saha world system, had our historical Buddha and the attendants of the bodhisattvas. And saha means endurance. To live in this world is to endure. Now, that doesn't mean suffer only. It does mean we endure events, but it also means we go on. We go on. We win an election, we go on, and we endure the outcome of that. And if we lose the election, we go on, and we endure the outcome of that. So I guess I could replace the word let go of outcome with endure. To me, they're the same. Thank you, Alan.